The road to Sangsaong was not on any official map, though it once appeared briefly in the margins of a French military sketch from 1962, a line smudged with red ink that ended in a crude square labeled Structure Inconnu. By 1976, during the darkest moments of Cambodia's blood-soaked revolution, that forgotten road became the arterial path for dozens of military trucks bearing children stripped of names, pasts, and futures. Hidden at the edge of the Phnom Penh jungle, behind a gate choked with vines and flanked by barbed wire, stood the orphanage, if it could be called that, known only by whispers as Sang Saong, the silent place. No official records declared its existence. No photographs were ever published. To the outside world, it was a humanitarian shelter for war orphans. In reality, it was a sorting ground for the nameless, the unwanted, the erased. The children arrived barefoot, hungry, their eyes too old for their faces. Some had watched their parents executed in the fields. Others had been found wandering near work camps or collected during the night raids and loaded into trucks like sacks of rice. At the gate, the moment they crossed the threshold, their names were taken. Not forgotten, taken. Their names were scratched from memory like chalk from a slate, replaced with sterile designations like KTSD-LY. Each child reduced to a pair of initials scrawled on thin linen tags sewn into their gray uniforms. They were forbidden to speak their real names. If they did, they were punished. If they wept for their mothers or whispered their father's name in sleep, they were marked for re-education, a term that came to mean isolation, starvation, and silence that drilled itself into the bones. The building was a colonial relic with high ceilings, flaking plaster, and echoes that seemed too loud for its halls. Its walls were painted a sickly yellow, and bore hand-drawn murals of smiling suns and birds, absurd in their cheerfulness. In the rear wing, there were barred windows and a room lined with peeling chalkboards, where no lessons were ever taught. The matron was known only as Mother Kim, though no one remembered her being addressed directly. She was tall, ageless, always veiled by a white scarf that masked her face from nose to chin. She moved like fog, soundless, slow, but ever present. No one saw her eat. No one saw her sleep. She walked with a ledger tucked under her arm and a ring of rusted keys that never jingled. Children whispered stories about her when they thought no one was listening, that she could read thoughts, that she had once buried a boy alive for speaking his real name, that she wore the scarf not out of modesty, but because her mouth had been sewn shut as a vow of silence. Whether these stories were true or terror-born, no one dared to test them. Routine was everything at Sang Saong. The children were woken before dawn by a bell that sounded like a scream trapped in metal. They lined up barefoot on the concrete floor, their heads shaved monthly, their eyes fixed downward. They were fed rice water and boiled roots, sometimes thin broth with floating shreds of cabbage. No one spoke at meals. Speaking invited a report, and a report invited a visit to the Red Room, a locked chamber with a steel door at the end of the south wing. Those who entered returned days later, thinner, quieter, eyes blank. Some never returned. New children arrived weekly, and often a few disappeared. The staff, if one could call them that, were faceless, interchangeable men in olive uniforms who never smiled. Some wore armbands with Khmer characters, Others bore no insignia. They patrolled silently, checking rooms, inspecting hands for writing, ears for whispers. In this place, even dreams were forbidden. And yet, even in silence, even in to Ushional cruelty, the children found ways to hold on. They drew names in the dirt behind the water pump and erased them quickly. They hid scraps of paper under floorboards with names written in blood and charcoal. They held hands in the dark and whispered lullabies with no words. But each time they were caught, the punishments grew crueler. The walls themselves seemed to listen. And, above all, Mother Kim always knew. In the winter of 1978, a French nurse named Elise Durocher was assigned to the orphanage as part of a brief Red Cross-sanctioned oversight mission. She was only 25, pale-skinned and soft-spoken, with a heart too large for the place she had entered. Her letters home were filled with restrained horror. They are not allowed to smile. They don't know how to play. They don't know their names. It's as if they were grown in a factory. Elise was supposed to administer medicine and conduct health checks, but she began asking questions. She recorded her observations in a small black journal kept in the lining of her bag. She wrote down the initials of the children, tried to match them to real names by quietly asking in French. Some children responded in whispers. One girl who refused to give even her initials, clung to Elise's leg and murmured the name Chanri over and over. Elise noted that within a day the girl was gone. Elise grew more frightened with each passing week. She spoke with a young boy, DM, who said he once had a little sister who disappeared after drawing their mother's face on the wall. They took her to the Red Room, he said, and then she was gone forever. They burned her name. Elise approached Mother Kim directly once, asking why so many children seemed to vanish. Kim simply stared through her, then raised a finger to her lips, gloved, unmoving. Elise's final journal entry, written the night before her scheduled departure in March 1979, read, "They don't want names, they want silence. I think I'm being watched. The girl with the burn mark keeps staring at me. I hear whispers in the walls at night. If I disappear, tell the world, this place is not an orphanage. It's a graveyard of names." She never boarded her return flight. Officials claimed she fled the country. The Red Cross cited stress-related disappearance. But those who searched Sangsaong after the fall of the Khmer Rouge found her suitcase hidden in a locked wardrobe. Her journal was never recovered. What investigators did find was a ledger, Mother Kim's personal record, sealed beneath the floor of the Red Room. In it, 8 names had been written and then crudely scratched out. Beside many of them were short notes. Spoke real name. Cried at night. Refused new designation. Each one ended with a red slash mark. Alongside the ledger was a bundle of rags, children's clothing, stained and torn, and a broken Polaroid camera with a single undeveloped frame still lodged in the cartridge. When developed, the photo showed a row of children standing shoulder to shoulder, eyes downcast, tape over their mouths. In the center stood a tall woman in white, her scarf unnaturally pristine, her eyes staring straight into the lens. No one remembers taking the photo. No one can identify the children. The orphanage was abandoned shortly after. The building stood for decades, collapsing slowly into jungle. But even in ruin, locals avoided the grounds. They said the air was wrong there, too still. They said if you stood near the old well behind the kitchen, you could hear children weeping, or worse, laughing. They said that sometimes, on quiet nights, a tall woman in white could be seen moving past the broken windows, ledger in hand, still counting the nameless dead. A place like Sang Saong does not simply vanish. It lingers, in memory, in trauma, in the eyes of survivors who have no birth certificates, no known relatives, and no idea what their names once were. Those who try to speak the truth often find that the world prefers the silence. But in the half-buried soil behind the iron gate, beneath crumbled bricks and broken dolls, the names still hum. Quietly, relentlessly, waiting to be heard. By the time the orphanage was officially shuttered in the early 1980s, the outside world had begun to forget Sang Saong. Tucked away like a sickness that no one dared name, its atrocities dissolved in the flood of Cambodia's post-war chaos. The surviving infrastructure of Phnom Penh was too busy rebuilding, its attention diverted by broader horrors, mass graves, and shattered temples. The regime had collapsed. Files were burned or vanished, and Sang Saong quietly sealed its rusted gates, boarded its windows, and returned to the jungle that had once recoiled from its presence. For 2 decades, no one officially entered. Yet among the villagers living near the tree line along Road 66, tales of the place grew darker, heavier, more spectral with each passing year. They said the building was never truly empty, that they heard footsteps along the corridor when the moon was low, that a strange odor, rotting flowers and burnt hair rose from the soil in the rainy season, that during the Chu Nam Thame, the Cambodian New Year, jasmine blossoms appeared at the gate, bundled in small, weathered cloth pouches tied with red string. No one claimed to place them. No one dared remove them. In 2001, long after Sang Saong had faded from public discourse, a coalition of human rights investigators, researchers, and journalists returned to the site. Their mission was part of a broader effort to trace missing children from the Khmer Rouge years, a grim task made nearly impossible by the regime's eradication of identity, records, and family lineage. Many believed the orphanage was little more than a decayed shell, a footnote in the ledger of state violence. What they found was something else entirely, something unaged, unyielding, and waiting. The main entrance had collapsed, but the interior remained almost entirely intact. Inside, mold crept along the walls like smoke tree, paped beneath plaster. The dining hall still held its long benches, warped by time and humidity. In the dormitories, dozens of narrow cots were arranged in perfect rows, as if the children had only just stepped outside for morning chores. Chalkboards still bore arithmetic problems in half-erased Khmer. Empty bowls sat on metal trays. It was a time capsule of unspoken grief. But in the West Wing, past a collapsed stairwell and beneath a sagging ceiling, they discovered something far more disturbing, a locked archive room. Behind it, amidst rat droppings, mildew, and broken shelves, were dozens of cardboard boxes, stacked and sealed with twine now brittle with age. Inside were Polaroids, hundreds of them. The photographs were each unique, yet eerily identical. A child stood before a blank wall, usually in a gray uniform, expressionless, mouth closed, arms pressed tightly to their sides. Across each child's chest was a strip of masking tape, yellowed and curled, on which was written a pair of initials and a two-digit number, LM12RT03SK29. No names, no dates, no context. Many of the children appeared no older than 5 or 6. Their eyes stared into the lens without fear or recognition, as if trained, or broken, to expect nothing. There were no folders, no accompanying files, only stacks of these photos bundled in decaying rubber bands, stored in shoeboxes marked in chalk with Khmer phrases such as sorted, processed, or for selection. Some images were water-stained. Others bore scratches across the children's faces, or jagged tears that removed them entirely. A few had been burned along the edges, most hauntingly. Several were scrawled with handwritten notes in red ink. Ghost. Returned. Traitor. Or, most disturbingly, tongueless. The team tried to cross-reference the initials with international refugee records, Red Cross registries, and school enroll, Almen logs, but the names matched nothing. These children had been erased with chilling precision. A volunteer named Lena Vasquez, a Spanish-born anthropologist, took it upon herself to digitize and catalog every photo. She worked late into the night in the makeshift field tent erected near the front gate. On the third evening, she reported something strange. 5 new Polaroids had been placed at the base of her cot. She assumed they had simply been missed during the collection, but when she returned to the archive room, they weren't among any of the bundles. One photo showed a girl in a blue shirt, not the standard uniform. Her head was shaved unevenly, and her eyes were looking slightly to the side, unusual since all other children faced forward. Lena asked the others if they had placed the photo there. No one had. That night she heard whispering in French near the gate, soft and urgent as if from a girl, but no one was there. When she tried to follow the sound, her flashlight flickered and died. The next morning she found that the girl's Polaroid was no longer under her cot. It had been pinned to the inside of her tent with a rusted nail, pierced straight through the image's eye. That day, their translator, a local man named Naroon, abruptly quit the assignment. He left without pay, refusing to set foot on the grounds again. He told Lena only one thing before disappearing down the road. "The girl in the blue shirt is still waiting. She has no number. You should not ask her name." The remaining team continued their investigation, but unease settled thickly among them. Several members claimed they began hearing the sound of children humming from behind the walls. One reported finding muddy footprints leading out of the collapsed kitchen, though no one had entered it in days. Another found their digital camera filled with new photos, grainy shots of the dormitories from angles they hadn't photographed. Some investigators tried sleeping outside the compound's perimeter, citing headaches, nausea, and intense nightmares when inside. Alina pressed forward with her cataloging. Of the 426 Polaroids recovered, only 17 matched partial names found in UN refugee camp intake records. Of those 17, 11 were confirmed deceased. Only 6 had survived, and all 6 refused to speak of their time in Sangsaong. One of them, a man now in his 40s named BT, agreed to a single interview. He sat across from Lena in a hotel room in Phnom Penh, chain-smoking and shaking. When she showed him the Polaroids, he went pale, pointing at one. "That's the girl," he said. "She was never fed, but she never died. We used to see her in the window at night when the moon was full. She never blinked. They tried to take her number away, but she didn't have one. When asked if she was real, he said only, 'She didn't cast a shadow.'" After that, he refused further contact. Back at the orphanage, Lena began photographing the photographs themselves, hoping high-resolution scans might reveal hidden details. One photo, when zoomed in, showed what appeared to be a handprint on the wall behind the child. Small, faint, but unmistakably bloody. Another had a shadow stretching behind the girl, but the light source suggested it should fall the other way. Yet another showed a smiling mouth faintly superimposed over the child's face, though no child in Sangsaong was ever photographed smiling. Each anomaly raised more questions. Then came the night when Lena disappeared. She had last been seen entering the archive room at sunset. When she failed to emerge by midnight, the team searched the premises. Her laptop was open, camera still running. Her notes were scattered, but she was gone. A single new Polaroid lay on the desk. It showed Lena, standing in the same blank-walled room as the children. Arms at her sides, mouth closed, tape across her chest. On the tape were the initials LV and the number 68. Her body was never found. The project was halted the next day. The archive was resealed. No one would speak officially of what happened. The photos, however, were quietly shipped to a private vault in Paris, where they remain inaccessible to the public. Only select scholars know of their existence. But some say that late at night, if you walk the back corridors of the Musée d'Histoire Coloniale, you might hear the faint sound of children humming, a tune with no melody, a song with no words. In the years since, multiple documentary teams have attempted to revisit Sangsaong. None have lasted more than a week. Equipment fails. GPS records scramble. Local guides refuse to step beyond the tree line. Those who do report dreams of standing in a line, barefoot, unable to speak, with something cold being pressed to their chest. A few have woken to find their arms covered in ash. Others claim to see a blue-shirted girl watching from the edge of the jungle, unmoving, always silent, always waiting. There are no graves at Sangsaong, no memorial plaques, no prayer flags or incense sticks to honor the dead. Only the photos remain, fragile and fading. Snapshots of children no one remembers, lives recorded without names, without stories, without endings, and yet their faces remain. Their stares, frozen in time, follow you. They whisper from behind the gloss of old film, not with words, but with the echo of everything they were denied. In the silence, in the stillness, they exist, not as ghosts, but as questions that refuse to die. And each time a new pair of initials appears, on paper, in dreams, in the margins of forgotten archives, they remind the living. We were here, we had names, and we are not finished. By the time 2023 arrived, Cambodia's landscape had changed in ways that suited progress but not memory. Where jungle once thickened and secrets once grew like weeds in silence, now coffee chains and tech offices rose from cleared earth, wrapped in LED banners and marble tile. Road 66 had been paved and rebranded. Now, a sleek four-lane artery feeding Phnom Penh's rapid expansion, and at Untold, eastern fringe, where Sang Saong once stood sealed behind rusted iron and rot-colored foliage, developers were breaking ground for Harmony Square, a high-end retail and residential complex promising luxury in a reclaimed space of history. They said the land had been cleansed, that healing was in progress, but they didn't know what still breathed beneath the surface. Or perhaps they did, and chose silence, the same silence that had protected Sang Saong all along. When the documentary crew from a French Cambodian media company received permission to film the site during demolition, the producers thought they were capturing a redemption arc, a triumph of urban modernization over tragedy. The intent was to include survivor testimony, archival overlays, and artistic reconstruction. But from the moment the first camera lens focused on the crumbling facade, the atmosphere thickened. Birds no longer perched nearby. A heavy hush fell over the grounds like a funeral veil. On the second day of filming, she appeared. No one saw her arrive. No vehicle was spotted. She simply stood at the gate as if she had always been there, a woman in her early 50s, draped in traditional white mourning robes, her hair pulled back into a disciplined bun. She wore no jewelry, no makeup. Her hands clutched a bundle of dried jasmine bound in red string. Her eyes did not blink. Her presence radiated neither hostility nor sorrow. It was something beyond both, an ancient stillness, like the bottom of a forgotten well. The crew noticed her, but assumed she was a local curious about the filming. When approached gently by the assistant director, she said nothing. Instead, she slipped a folded piece of paper beneath the rusted gate and placed the jasmine on top. When they opened the note later, they found 5 sets of initials written in careful, deliberate strokes. KL, DM, TS, HY, and LL Bean. At the letters was a single phrase in Khmer. Remember them without permission. She returned the next day and the next, always at the same hour, always without speaking. When finally questioned by the crew's translator, she spoke only once, voice hoarse and cracked as though unused for decades. She pointed to a second-floor window, its glass long shattered, frame crooked with age. Her words were, "That's where I stopped being real." No one pressed her further. On the 5th day, she was gone. She did not return again. But what followed her final visit would unravel everything the crew thought they were documenting. That same day, while filming drone footage of the second floor's skeletal interior, one of the camera operators stumbled, quite literally, into a thin crack in the plaster near the northwest stairwell. It wasn't part of the original architectural plan. The wall gave slightly, not like solid concrete, but like something hollow hidden behind centuries of shame. With a hesitant hands and a crowbar, they pulled away the rotted boards and plaster until a narrow crawl space revealed itself, about shoulder width, smelling of mold, copper, and something more ancient. Inside, crouched in darkness, were bones. Dozens of them, arranged in patterns that suggested they had not simply died there, but had been placed, stacked, deliberately, ritualistically, as if in offering or warning. The bones were small, child-sized. Some had cloth wrapped around them. Gray uniforms, now blackened with time and decay. fragments of masks remained. Tags with initials still barely legible in red ink. There were no skulls with jaws wide in screaming, no postures of struggle. Only the silence of arranged death. Alongside the remains, the crew uncovered a torn scarf, stiff with blood, and a small wax-sealed notebook wrapped in silk. The seal was marked not with an emblem, but a thumbprint pressed into red wax. When cracked open, the notebook's first page bore a name in unmistakable cursive. Elise Durocher, the missing nurse from 1979, long presumed dead. The pages wabiyu. Ithin were brittle but intact. Her handwriting grew more frantic with each line, her entries spiraling into desperation, then clarity, then madness, then purpose. She wrote of children she tried to protect, of the blue-shirted girl with no file, of a child known only as LL, whom she had nicknamed Lena in secret. She claimed Lena had an unusual gift. She remembered everything, not just faces or moments, but the pain of others, the names no one was supposed to say, the songs that had been banned. Elise believed Lina had become something more than human, not in a supernatural sense, but as a vessel, a carrier of collective grief, so heavy it altered the space around her. Elise had hidden Lina in the crawlspace on the final night before her own disappearance. She feared Lina was being hunted, not by soldiers, but by the silence itself, by the institution's demand for erasure. Her last entry was barely legible, ink blotted by tears or water damage. But the final sentence stood clear and sharp, as if time itself had preserved it. They told me to call her LL, but her name was Lina. I remember. I must remember. If we all forget, the silence wins. The crew never aired the footage. Within 72 hours of discovering the crawlspace, production was halted. 3 members resigned without explanation. 2 checked themselves into private hospitals for what was officially listed as acute psychological dissociation. 1 cameraman, in an interview conducted off-record, claimed he began seeing initials in his sleep, written on mirrors, scratched into his skin, carved into wood grain. He said every time he closed his eyes, he saw the girl in the blue shirt, staring out from a second-floor window. Not blinking, not moving, just waiting. A month later, the site was fully demolished. The crawlspace was filled with cement. The bones were reportedly turned over to the Ministry of Culture, but no public record of them exists. A luxury shopping mall now stands on the location. Its grand opening featured a ribbon-cutting ceremony, attended by smiling officials and business elites, but construction workers who built it reported strange events, missing tools, lights that flickered in sequences, jasmine flowers that appeared overnight near the foundations. One worker quit after hearing children humming through the ventilation system. Another swore he saw a woman in white standing in the parking structure at 3:07 a.m. unmoving, surrounded by fog despite a clear night. He described her as barefoot, holding nothing, saying nothing. But the smell of jasmine lingered for days. Today, if you visit Harmony Square, you'll find sleek escalators and polished tile, boutique shops, and cafes. But near the northeast entrance, where a decorative mural covers an old wall, there's a stain that resurfaces no matter how often it's painted over. An outline, faint but undeniable, of 5 initials. KLDM, TSHY, and LL. No one knows who keeps rewriting them. Security footage never catches the act. Mall employees walk past without noticing. But survivors, those few who remain, know. They recognize the initials. They remember the Polaroids. They remember the silence that was never broken. And somewhere, beyond cameras, beyond names, in the folds of time and ash and jasmine, Lina still waits. Not for rescue, not for revenge, but for remembrance. For someone to say her name and mean it. For someone to carry her story forward, not in whispers, not in myths, but in truth. Because when names are stolen and memories erased, it is not death that wins. It is silence, and silence is patient. It waits through concrete. It seeps through walls. It thrives in the space between what was done and what was denied. But names, once spoken, once remembered, have power. And hers was Lina. She was real. She lived. She remembered for all the others. And in doing so, she became the one story silence could never fully bury. The girl with no name had always had one. And now, so do the lost.